can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sand. And right now, I feel like 100 grand.
You are listening to Inspired Insider with your host, Dr. Jeremy Wise.
Dr. Jeremy Weiss here, founder of InspiredInsider.com, where I talk with inspirational entrepreneurs and leaders. Today is no different. I have Tom Shepansky of Rethink Ideas. You can check him out at rethinkideas.com. And Tom, I'm going to formally introduce you, but I always like to point out other episodes people should check out of the podcast. And actually, I had Morgan Tierney, who started off as an intern. This speaks to the culture and what you've created at Rethink, I think, Tom. You know, she started as an intern and she worked her way up to partner. And that's an amazing story of the work that they do. So you can check that out, but also just how she progressed and the culture and everything like that, which we'll touch on. And I want to go back to the source, which is you, Tom. How was the culture? How did this stuff start from the beginning? And we'll get into that. Another good guest was Todd Taskey. Todd Taskey, we're talking about succession. We're going to talk about succession and how you set the company up. Todd Taskey is interesting because he matches private equity with agencies. He helps sell agencies to private equity. And he has a Second Bite podcast, and he found sometimes people make more on the second bite than they do on the first because of how private equity works, right? And Tom has chosen not to go that route. But there's a lot of different routes people can take for their reasons. And it's just an interesting conversation about valuation and how he looks at the landscape of business in general. So check that one out as well. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses give to and connect to their Dream 100 relationships. And how do we do that? We actually help you run your podcast. We're an easy button for a company to launch and run a podcast. We do the accountability, the strategy, and the full execution. You know, Tom, we call ourselves the magic elves that work in the background to make it look easy for the host and the company so they can run their company, create great content, and create great relationships. And for me, you've heard me say this before, the number one thing in my life is relationships. I'm always looking at ways to give to my best relationships. And I have found no better way over the past decade to profile the people and companies I most admire and share with the world what they're working on. And there's a lot to learn from that. So if you've thought about podcasting, you should. If you have questions, go to rise25.com. And I'm excited to introduce Tom Shepansky. He's co-founder of Rethink Communications. The agency was started in 1999 in Vancouver, and it's grown to be one of the top independent agencies globally. They were ranked second globally as a network, and they have offices across Canada and also in New York. Tom governs the business as a trustee with his two co-founders, Chris Staples and Ian Grace. Rethink has worked on some award-winning campaigns. So I'll pull up their website and show a few of them, but Molson, Coors, IKEA, A&W, Shaw Communications, McCain Foods, and many, many more. And Tom also is a rock star, literally, bass guitarist in his band. So Tom, thanks for joining me.
Hey, great to be here, Jeremy. Thanks. I really, really look forward to our conversation.
Talk about Rethink and the initial idea that you had for Rethink.
Yeah, it really started by reading a book. We were with a Vancouver-based agency that sold to a multinational. I will say the founder of that agency gave the speech that every agency president gives. Nothing's going to change. And I laugh because that speech, not that it's a bunch of BS, but within weeks, if not months, it was really clear to a bunch of us that things had changed. So we read a book by Andy Law called Open Minds. And Andy was in the UK. TBWA had bought the agency that he was with. He broke away. He said, you know what? I'm going to stay true to the values that I believe in, to the purpose that I've got, to a culture that I think we've created here in London, England. And we were reading this book. And so I got together with the two co-creative directors from Vancouver, and we started talking. We started talking about how we had this great independent agency and how things did change when the multinational took over. And we said, well, why don't we take all of the things that we know were great about that agency, and let's, not to use our name because we didn't have it yet, but let's rethink some things, and let's create a culture where creativity is number one. Let's create a culture where it's always people first. Let's create a culture where people can do the best work of their career. And I'm the business guy too. I said, well, let's create a culture and a business that can make some money too. So that was really the core of it, Jeremy. News leaked, we broke away and had fairly, quick success. We grew to, about 40 people after our first year. We had a couple million in revenue. We were cash flow positive in our first year, which is very unusual, self-funded. And then it's just been a journey over the last almost 24 years from there, and just ups and downs, but for the most part wouldn't have changed a thing. The two co-founders, Chris Staples and Ian Grace, we were together 2 weeks ago with our life partners on our annual trip we do, and we take turns picking a place, and we still truly like and love each other like brothers. And that, for me, says everything. If I'm proud of one thing, I'm proud of lots of things. It's the fact, and you started, Jeremy, talking about relationships. To us and to me, relationships are everything. They start with your founders, your partners, your clients, your suppliers, everyone, and we had a lot of amazing people and continue to in our circle, and it's based on great relationships.
I want to talk about handling quick growth also, like out of the gate, right? 40 people, successful, lots of revenue, clients. And before we get to the quick growth, though, let's talk about the partnerships, right? Partnerships are like marriage, right?
Yeah.
How much of that was thought out? How much of it was luck when you were talking and starting this company with the two other people?
Well, one of the two, so Chris Staples and I go back to working at the very first agency I'm showing my age now, in 1983 in Edmonton, Alberta. We worked together for, after Rethink, it was 35 years. We worked together our whole career at 4 different agencies, including Rethink. Ian will be over 30 years. So for us, coming into this, we knew each other well enough that we knew what we were getting into. And we also knew that, like in any partnership, and I'm sure you agree, Jeremy, you've got to have complementary strengths so that we don't duplicate each other. And we very much had sort of complementary strengths that we, not that you deferred, but Chris was an amazing with the press. He's a journalism grad. He was the lead spokesperson for Rethink. As the co-founders, we were happy. It's like, yeah, it featured Chris a bit. Who cares? It's good for Rethink. Ian's the pure craftsman and an amazing creative. Both Ian and Chris, amazing creatives. I had the 2 top creatives in Canada starting the agency with, so I was the fortunate business guy. And then for me, it was about building trust, working with clients on their strategy, and I would say creating the conditions for Chris and Ian and the creative team to do the very best work and to solve the client's problem with an idea. So, yeah.
Talk about the quick growth, right? Because a lot of times I'm curious on key hires, but growing to 40 people in a year, you had a lot of hires out of the gate.
Well, we did, but you sort of had to stay ahead of it. And we've continued in our quick growth years because COVID was very good to us. We had massive rapid growth through COVID, and we encouraged the team as we governed as trustees to build it and stay ahead of it. You can't staff the agency with freelance hoping that eventually you'll know what the reoccurring revenue is. You've got to have the confidence that we're going to grow to that level. And we hired full time. We hired, it was a bit of build it and they will come. And we weren't scared to build it and get ahead of it. As we opened Toronto, we built it and got ahead of it as we opened Montreal, and now going into New York, the same thing. So I think, for entrepreneurs out there, I think you have to believe that you're going to create the business environment. And quite frankly, clients aren't going to hire you if you're entering a new market and you're fledgling and you only have a handful of people. And Chris and I spent a lot of time in Toronto, with prospective clients. And then they would always ask, okay, who's here? And we had to have more than a couple people when we expanded. So if I was to give you one answer to that question, it would be get ahead of it, build it, and they will come.
What's the timeline? Like, if you break down the timeline, did you go out and the three of you, you're in a room and you're like, okay, you went out and got a client first and then you started hiring? What was the timeline of that? What did that look like?
Yeah, so the story I told you about the agency we're at, we had an agreement when they found out we were leaving. They were gonna give us a month. We were gonna have this, really nice, easy exit, and we had an agreement too that no one would talk to the press. Well, we get a call. It hadn't even been announced internally. And we get a call. So we hear, this is the Globe and Mail, like the national business press. We hear you're leaving. Someone told us, like, come on. So we were very prepared. We had our photo, we had our press release. We hit full send that day. And it was funny because it was a year ago last weekend. It was the Canadian Thanksgiving long weekend. So it hit the National Post, it hit the Globe and Mail. So it was like our news of leaving. So we didn't have a long exit. We had basically 3 days and we were out. And we did we got about a month's pay to cover the gap that we agreed to. We said, let's sit down and talk about, who we're going to work with. And we had this little whiteboard. I'll tell you a story. We had a little whiteboard. And on that whiteboard, we said, we want to work with people we believe in. Underneath that, we want to work with brands that we believe in. Under that, we said, we have to share the belief that a creative idea can solve the business problem, and a good creative idea, not just a mediocre idea. And then I put underneath it, you have to believe that they have the money to pay our rates, right? So this guy. So today, our purpose is creating believers in the brands we believe in. That drove us to get to where we started the agency. It's continued to drive us for, it's going to be 25 years. And that same purpose, the notion of believe and creating believers is the purpose that has continued to drive us. So yeah, there's some of our clients. There's some of our believers.
If you're listening to the audio only, there is a video piece and we're looking at the rethinkideas.com/work. I would encourage anyone to check these out. There's some really cool campaigns. It just, for me at least, I could say, Tom, I got my creative juices flowing, whatever it is, just to look at the work in this, what you did with some of these specifically. And we talked actually at length with Morgan. So if you check the one out with Morgan, I did. We talked about the Add the M campaign. We talked about a couple of these campaigns, to the Heinz campaign. But talk about the first key client and how you landed that.
So we were out, as I said, you do the time. We were out in October. By late November, within 60 days, if you just scroll past it, A&W. So A&W, at least for the non-Canadian listeners, A&W is different than the A&W in the US. A&W in Canada had grown to be sort of on par with Burger King and Wendy's in the QSR landscape. So very close to, number 2 to McDonald's, but sort of working hard to get there. So A&W was just going through a transition, and we were honestly in the worst little office. The office did not have heat. We had power, but no heat. And it's like October in Vancouver, so it's cool. So we had these portable space heaters. We had parts of the office painted, and the parts we couldn't paint, we closed the doors because we carpeted up to the door, but not past, right? So we made it seem like we're legitimate. So we had the president, the CEO, and the 2 marketing people in, and my partner Chris proceeded to tell them how bad their ads were, and the CEO, he could have walked out, but he said, "Why do you think we're here?" Right? So within 60 days, A&W hired us. I'm proud of lots of things that we've done over the course of our time, but that relationship is still intact today. We've been partners for over 2 decades. I've known all 3 CEOs that reigned, and all all the great marketing people and a true partnership. And they've grown to be a clear number 2 in the burger quick service category, and we've grown alongside of them, right? Like we've grown alongside of them, and they've challenged us, Jeremy. Over the years, we've challenged each other to be better, to do better. We almost got fired once. That's a whole nother story, but we weren't listening. I'd say the reason that we almost got fired is we weren't listening. And I went back and said to my partners, unless we listen to them and give them something close to what they want, we're not going to be their agency. And we dug deep and came back with a heartwarming idea that reignited the brand and reignited our relationship with them. And again, we'd eroded trust. And through that moment, we started to rebuild trust. So, I mean, A&W has been, so proud. And I care a lot about food, and what A&W has done is they've leaned into better food, a better ingredient story to really address some of the things that are going on in that category. So within the category, they stand out because they've got a great story, they have a great tasting product, but they've got no hormones and steroids in their beef. They've got they've got a product story that supports the brand and is that evidence that reinforces the great taste they provide. So yeah.
What are some keys to, we're looking at some of these, and you have some amazing companies on here.
Yeah.
What would you say, when I think about it, I'm like, it can't be easy to win business with these companies. There's a lot of competition. What are some keys to winning the business of some of these bigger companies? I mean, looking back now, like you have this huge track record, but then you had 1 or 2 clients, right? So what have you found the keys to winning business from these?
Well,
companies?
if you go back to that whiteboard on month 1, we stayed true to those values. Like you can't compromise. We said no to categories we weren't excited about or didn't believe in. We politely said no thanks to brands we didn't think aligned with our values, and we wouldn't be excited and motivated to work on. So I think the power of being selective in a kind, respectful way, and knowing that there's enough business for everybody out there. And I think, I too am inspired by, the brands that we align with. And I think staying true to those values. And then when we wanted to go for something, you go for it 150%. You don't pitch 6 things hoping that you get 1. You pitch 1 or 2 hoping you get both, right? Like I think not to say we've got a better pitch win rate, but my hunch is we do, because we put our foot forward on fewer things that we really, really believe in. And we say no to some things, to some big brands that, we look at their history of marketing and communications, and we go, I mean, they haven't done much good work. Do you think we're going to be able to change that? And you know what the answer is? Usually no. Now, there's lots of brands that have been built on more functional, I won't say pedestrian, but more functional, less creative marketing and communication. And that's okay. Like you look at the famous, Mac campaign, I'm a Mac, I'm a PC, right? Like, which is a brilliant idea. But you look at those 2 brands, both incredibly successful brands, built in one more emotion driven, design driven, one more functional driven, but an incredible brand nonetheless. There's no question which brand Rethink would have lined up with, right? And we had actually I remember the first Mac airport, because we bought, these Blueberry laptops. I don't remember, I'm a little older, I think, but they had these, they came up with we had the Blueberry laptops, and I remember printing from the first airport. We were so excited. Again, this is 1999, right? So
what were some of your favorite campaigns? You mentioned Mac versus PC. It could be one of your campaigns or just one that you've admired like throughout the years.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I love what Apple has done over the years, what Chiat did in the days. I mean, I always held them up in such high regard, so I would say Apple. I mean, Wyden and the work over the years with Nike, again, just so standout, so brave, and they stood. And I'd say the commonality between those big brands is so much of it was emotion driven. To ask me to pick one of our own is like saying, do I love my daughter more than my son? It's really hard, right? So, but there are some I know, when we opened Toronto, some of the early work on Molson Canadian, to sort of reinforce that brand as a proud Canadian iconic brand, really won the hearts of Canadians, especially going into the Olympics when that was aligned. I mean, IKEA has historically done, we were so excited and still continue to be so proud to be their partner. But I mean, IKEA lamp and some of the other iconic IKEA commercials stand out for me in terms of great work. So and I would say just, what we always tried to do, Jeremy, was have a bar where most of our clients are above average, just hitting. We always said we got to hit at least a double. We'll shoot for home runs. Not to use as I should be using hockey analogies, not baseball, right? As a good Canadian boy, but maybe a hat trick, not just a single.
You're speaking my language either way. What about culture? We talked a little bit before we hit record about culture and the conditions that you can create to foster creativity.
Yeah. Well, I think leadership always and culture always starts at the top with leadership and the example that we set. I think a consciousness around the way we treat people. I'll give you an example of respecting people's time. And early on we said if you're around for 10 years, you get a 10-week sabbatical. At that point we said, you've committed to us for a period of time, we're going to make a commitment to you. And the reason we did that is because as founders, we were 8.5 years in, and I wouldn't say burning out, but we really needed a break. So we said, what we give to ourselves, we should give to everybody else, right? So prior to COVID, this was 4, 5, 6 years before COVID, we came up with working out of office, wooing. Right. So we had a whole, this is before remote work. And we said, we trust you enough that you can woo and you can pick a woo day. Now, a woo day doesn't mean that you're, playing with your kid in the park. A woo day means you may be doing some parental things, but you're working. And there were some woo rules that you had to follow, right? You had to be available on your phone. You had to respond to your email. You would lose your woo privileges if you didn't follow those things. So I think.
What are some of the woo rules? What were some of the woo rules?
There were those, right? You had to be responsive. You had to be available. You couldn't just slack off and not be plugged in, right? So you couldn't go off the grid and not be on your mobile. And then there were over only so many woo days in a month. You couldn't take 10 in a month. You had selected a number, and you also had to be respectful if you were picking a woo day in a week that maybe didn't make sense for a woo day. Someone would say, come on, you just can't, we can't do it this week. Right. So there had to be an openness around that. So, but the one thing I would say too, is that as an independent company, we can start sharing profits, and we do at 7.5% margin. So we built a profit sharing plan early on, and it continues to this day, that starts to share across the board to staff and partners starting at 7.5. It tiers up every 2.5 points from 7.5 to 10 to 12.5 to 15 and above. And it gets more generous. As we make more money, we share more money, right? So for us, it was always about sharing the riches, sharing the pie. And that's different. And it takes, I guess it takes just, being in the place where you saw all the partners make all the money, but as a key staff member, you got $100 and a pat on the back at the holiday party. And it's like, hang on a minute. I knew I'm I'm in charge of a big piece of revenue. I know what kind of money we're making. And so I think it's that spirit of sharing and just really having gratitude and thanks. I think culture starts with, do you have gratitude? Do you have appreciation? And then I will say, culture's always tested when you got to lay people off. Going into COVID, we had to lay people off. You still can have a respect. Yeah, obviously you can have a respectful culture. We have to manage our business. 08, 09, going into that period, we laid off a third of our staff because we saw revenue evaporate almost overnight. So we've parted ways respectfully with other partners, and I think what we parted ways with a partner about 2.5 years ago, Jeremy, and it was hard for them. They were really upset. They went away. Lawyers were talking. Anyway, we thought we were in a good place. So I will share a hockey story. I was at the hockey rink about a year ago and I bumped into him and I went over and I gave him a big hug. And I said, "How are you doing?" He said, "I've never been happier. Thank you."
Why
right?
is that?
We knew he was sort of frustrated in his role. He's really good, really talented guy. He was frustrated in his role. He was contributing, but he was disruptive, and he wasn't prepared to sort of address some of those things. So you know what? We amicably parted. And then I think he realized upon reflection, he contributed, he helped drive business, but you get to a point sometimes where maybe you got to move on, and maybe sometimes moving on is the best thing for you. So I think, even you're probably tested most when you're parting ways or ending relationships that sometimes have to end. You just have to be kind. You got to open your heart. You have to be, you got to pay a fair amount for whatever settlement you reach, right? So anyway, that's the way we approach culture, and the last thing, and then you got to actually ask people how they're doing, right? So we have a twice a year. It's called Culture Check, and the first question is, Jeremy, how are you doing? Are you happy at Rethink? Are you doing the best work of your career? Are you getting mentorship? Are you getting good feedback? Are we leaning into diversity, equity, and inclusion the way most firms need to be these days? Like, we're asking the questions that matter in order to make sure that, and I could tell you, Montreal creative department doesn't seem as like when we get it, we can slice it, dice it. Participation rates over, I think it's well over 90%. So, we get anecdotal feedback, and there's always some people who aren't happy, and you hope they're not using Culture Check to express their dissatisfaction, but we're asking people and we're asking for feedback, and then we're doing things about it. So
talk about the profit sharing piece. Let's say someone's listening and they're like, Tom, that sounds great. I don't know where to start. How did you figure it out? And how did you come to what made sense for your business?
You know what? Through our whole journey, I'd say we made a lot of it up. You talk to lots of other business leaders and you get good ideas. And then just, it's funny, I'll use my musical journey as a bit of a parallel. You kind of got to make it your own, right? Like, you listen to the original recording and go, well, our band could never do what the Heartbreakers did with Tom Petty, but we could take Free Fallin' and kind of make it our own, and not make it at all like it, because it would be disastrous, because we can't even hit that high note he hit. So with profit sharing, we talked to lots of other entrepreneurs about how to do it, and then we said, well, like with a lot of people, and I will say especially creative people, like just keep it simple. Like, they don't want to have some formula that they have to figure out. So we have a staggered sort of percentage that grows as our profit grows. We said, well, and it was real simple with our CFO at the time. I said, well, what's sort of the bare minimum for working capital and keeping money in the business? He said, well, it's not 10, it's probably between 5 and 10. So I said, 7.5. He goes, yeah, about there. I said, okay, why don't we start profit sharing at 7.5? And I'm not joking. It was almost that simple. And then with my other two founders, lots of collaboration. And you know what, I'll tell you, as creative guys and design thinkers, they would always be able to see things really in a simple, clear way so that we could describe it and communicate it. And we created a way to share with staff, a way to share with partners, and a simple pool model that built over time. So, and then, we had some discretion at the end of each year. We would have discretionary amounts. So if we saw someone who was just going over and above, and maybe in that particular year, Jeremy was underpaid at the band they might have been, we may say, hey, let's give a little bit extra there. So we had, and you do have as leaders that discretionary ability to really thank and reward the people that look like they need it. So that was, and I would say we took a very intuitive approach to it, as opposed to analytical, formula driven, 1 + 1 + 4 = 6. It was very, we built pools, we had ways of ranking, we had feedback from people that we sought, and that's how we did it. So
how does it do you do that like at the end of every year, or what's the kind of the time frame?
Yeah, and we do it every year. But what we do, we're a private organization. We share and report on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Certainly at a partner level, there's monthly, quarterly updates on we've got a pretty good dashboard on revenue, staffing mix, profitability, our run rate, with projections to the end of the year. So we kind of know, like I can tell you right now, we're calendar fiscal. By now into October, we have a pretty good sense as to where 2023 is going to end. So we already are looking at, what does that mean in terms of how the pools are built? And I think you start the communication early. Hey, we had great profitability here for these reasons. We're going to be a bit behind. And the beauty of being private is we don't have to inflate earnings this year, because we've invested, as we, opening New York with Canadian dollars is not cheap. I can tell you that, right? So as we invest, the build it and they will come philosophy, you've got to have, money to invest in those initiatives. Our global ambition and leaning into that, and some of the investment that's taken has costed us money too. So yeah, I'd say we have a sense right now, but we're tracking through the year. We communicate through the year. Staff kind of know where things are at. Certainly the partner group knows where they're at. And as the founders, as you said off the top, we govern as trustees. We've got a fiduciary responsibility as the trustees of the partnership, and that will be for a period of time. We're working on how that transition works over time. We called it, a more perpetual partnership model, with the desire to have this thing go on, from generation to generation is our hope and our dream. So
I have two questions on this, Tom, which is, I know some people are on the great game of business philosophy, where they do open book and they share everything, and that's really helped the team, everyone from the team, help with profitability, right? Because if they're getting the bottom line, well, so I'm curious, on one hand, what governing this way and having this profit sharing, how has it helped people think creatively about profitability and the bottom line? So I'll start there with that question.
Yeah, I would say, if I was to describe our sharing, and this would be all staff, we share enough, but not too much, right? If that makes sense. Like, we share enough so that people have a sense as to where things are at and why they're where they're at. With the partner group, it goes deeper, where that leadership group can also influence the outcomes that we're trying to achieve. I think that the important thing for us, and I know before we went live, you and I talked a bit about our book that we wrote on the journey that we went on. We always said we looked at our business through the lens of people, product, and profit, and we always said in that order. Hire great people, do great work, and make money. So in our world, the the sort of profit metrics and how we manage that, we with the partner team, we ask how the people are doing. We look at the work and make sure it's great. And then in addition to those two things, it's like, okay, profit is important. We need the money to pay competitive salaries and to have profit sharing that's a reward for people's time and talent. So so I'd say we've gone deeper and deeper. And now at the size we're at, we used to be 50, 100 people. Now we're north of 400. You have to distribute that responsibility, because otherwise it's impossible to drive the behaviors you need department by department, office by office, client by client, to be able to get the outcome. So we're working. And in fact, one of the challenges this fiscal and probably over the next couple with our leadership team and our CFO are just having a better visibility as we can drill down into different teams and different offices in terms of where they're at and how they're performing, and having dashboards that are really clear. And people are inherently competitive. Like when there's a dashboard, you don't want your group to be at the low end of the scale. You just don't, right? So we'll and there's then some reasons for people being lower and higher, but we'll share more of that, and I'd say that's in development right now for sure.
Yeah, I'm always curious because when people participate in that bottom line, I'm wondering if you got any specific actually suggestions, like they know that Tom, we don't need the Taco Tuesdays. It's just that's just overhead we don't need. Like people start thinking of it as their business. Do you get any of those suggestions? Do you find because of this, how you've arranged the culture?
Yeah, I think, I think if there's, we always, I think had, we were always in B and C buildings, not fancy offices. So we were, our offices were often a reflection of how we looked at some of those overhead elements. And we said from the beginning, and I think we've continued to this day, to invest in people, not in the trappings that you can get trapped into. So I would, and I would say we listened. I mean, if people didn't see value in certain things that we did, we'd stop doing them. But I'll give you an example of one tradition that just stuck, because we celebrate Valentine's Day of all things, right? We play hearts. So we have every office stops for most of the day, and we get these little sort of cucumber square sandwiches. And we have a hearts tournament, and we crown the Queen of Hearts on Valentine's Day, right? So, and it's become, and then of course we have a secret Valentine creative contest where you pick someone's name, and then you have to get to know that person, and you have to deliver a secret Valentine, and then we have a competition on what's the best secret Valentine. So we that and do you think the leadership sort of created that? No, it was staff. So I think we said, hey, let's have a hearts tournament. And then they turned it into a creative assignment, so I'll bet it's been going on for 15, 18 years, right? So there are those traditions that they naturally emerge out of the culture, and you can't force it. You can't try to make it happen. But when it happens, you certainly invest and keep it going, right? So you order better sandwiches, that's for sure. So
you hit on a piece about, succession, and you're the trustee. Talk about how you have this unique perspective and structure with succession.
Well, yeah, and that we could have spent the whole hour on that, but I'll try to be fairly tight. What we looked at is, okay, if we decided, and we did, that we weren't going to sell, then we had to really, no pun intended, rethink our succession plan to create a structure to allow us to step back in a way that would allow other leaders to emerge and a new structure to be created. So I'll give you the sort of short story. Is what we did is we had a incorporated company that the founders were the majority shareholders in. We did a valuation and a freeze. We converted really that entity to a limited partnership, and then a general partner and a trust sits above that limited partnership. So today, the founders who are and were the majority shareholders are the trustees and the general partner. We're not active in the business, Jeremy. So we govern, we keep our, we get updates, monthly. We have a quarterly board meeting. So and to answer the question that some people, well, what was with your shares? What happened? So what we did is, upon that valuation, we've taken the risk, and again, if we founded it, we believe in what we founded. We believe in the future, and we're compensated over time, and that valuation will be delivered over time. But we maintain the control of the partnership as trustees and general partners. So we've created a structure that gives us the control, but not a big stick. It's like we give the operation, the leadership team, room to operate. I'd say we've got one of the best teams on the planet today. We've replaced ourselves, I'd say, with smarter people. Like we've got like, that would be the key, is be brave enough to replace yourself with as, if not more talented people than you, and give them room and give them the space to do the great things that you had the space to do. So we've really tried to do that. And I would say, some of our best growth has come with us in a trustee chair. Our best creative recognition, bar none, has been with us out of, I always joke a little bit, the best work of our career is when we weren't doing the work, but we were governing the work. But that, isn't that okay? Isn't that what success should look like? That you've created the conditions that the team that's come in after you, and we were, many times ranked best agency in Canada. Well, this team, we've won, Ad Age Creative Agency of the Year since we've been governing. So we created the foundation for the business to continue to grow and build on the foundation that we built. And my hope will be, as a North American, and I'll call myself a settler on these lands, I look at the Indigenous communities and their lens around 7 generations of decisions we make today will make so they can live on through 7 generations. We have so much to learn from the Indigenous communities in terms of how they think and how they look at the world. I view our partnership model as a sustainable model, a model that can continue in perpetuity, that will be replaced as trustees one day, and will pass the baton, and the leadership will step out of their role as leadership into a trustee role, and it will keep rolling. And time will tell, but we worked really hard. We're working on sort of governance structure right now. I finished my director's course, so I'm an accredited director. So I've got some governance knowledge, but now I've got some additional governance education to help us really set up the right kind of structure for us as well. So,
at what point in the business, Tom, did you start to put those pieces in place?
Well, long before. I'd say it was probably 7 years ago. We started on this path. I turned 60 last year. I turned 61 yesterday. So, in our mid to late 50s, we were starting to think about, like, okay, hang on a minute. And let's be honest, the ad business is a younger person's business. I was still, and I loved what I did. I'd spent 35 plus years doing it. So at some point, there's lots of things I want to do in my life. And we were all prepared. We were fortunate. The three of us were prepared to, step back at the same time and create a structure and plan. We hired a really good, amazing consultant, Natalie Michael, who's a dear friend. And Natalie sat with Chris, Ian, and I, and we formulated sort of what we called sort of our next chapter. And really started to think creatively about succession in a different way, and then we committed to it. Like we didn't, because it's so classic that, founders, we talked a bit about baseball players and hockey players. How many athletes, declare, hey, I'm going to retire? Yeah, good one. Well, it's the same thing as leaders. It's like we say we're going to retire and then hang on a minute, not yet. Hang on, no, another year. I'm just going to go one more. We just need to get to that product launch. And all of a sudden, and then you know what happens? Great people who are in the wings wanting to lead, they just leave. They go, you know what? That person's never going to step down. There's not going to be room for me to leave. So we created that structure and environment, and then we just did it. We just took a leap of faith, and and it's been awesome. And it's a bit, I feel as a trustee, a bit like do you have kids, by the way? I don't know if you've got
kids.
Yeah. So I feel like a parent some days in a really good way, but these aren't toddlers. These are, but it's next generation. And it's a lot like, they're not blood, but this is like a family business, right? And I'd say independent private companies can think and act like family business. But I said at a banquet one night, I said, family business without the family baggage, right? So it's that, and with respect, right? So
I'd love for you to talk about, first of all, I have one last question. I want to just encourage people to check out rethinkideas.com to learn more. I'd love for you to hold up the book for a second and talk about the book. But tell me a little bit of your favorite books that you have learned from and business or whatever. So you're holding up Rethink the Business of Creativity. Talk about that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's got the three founders' names on it. You had Morgan Tierney on the pod. Morgan was she rewrote the whole book. I mean, she was so this was a joint collaboration. We actually weren't going to put our names on it, but the team said, come on, these were your initial ideas and principles and values that you set for the company. So we agreed to, but like everything we did at Rethink, it was a joint effort, and Morgan was amazing. So the idea behind the book was really to share and inspire, sort of open source to, and I always say, these are some of the tips and tricks, a bit like what I talked about earlier and making music your own. Some of these, Ian learned peer review at Pasadena Art School, and he brought that into the previous agency he was at. We brought it to Rethink, but we kept making it better. So, steal an idea, make it a bit better, and make it your own, right? So I think we just said, let's share in an open source way, sort of our journey and lessons learned along the way. In terms of my books, I've got an eclectic sort of mix. I love Malcolm Gladwell. I think he's just so prolific, and he Outliers just looked at things. We identified a little bit as an outlier, being a West Coast sort of, West Coast company, with not maybe in the center of commerce or the ad business, but, we came at it from a very different point of view. And then, just different books. I've been intrigued with, Jeremy, these days, sort of capitalism. And, the founder of Whole Foods wrote Conscious Capitalism. There's actually someone wrote a book called Rethink Capitalism. I'm reading a book called Saving Capitalism. I did a talk last week on, it's my band name, but Capitalism 2.0. And I think the evolution of capitalism has to be talked about, has to be thought about. I don't think, what I would say is, in the last 20 years, capitalism's rewarded fewer, and the middle class in North America isn't doing that well, right? So how are we setting up systems and ways of working that lift more people? And what we tried to do, and everyone's got to do what they do. It's hard to have that point of view without what we did at Rethink. But what we did at Rethink is we maintain the business privately so that we can redistribute the profit to people who work for us and live in those cities and communities, and they can buy homes, and they can pay for mortgages, and they can put kids through school, and that's what we're able to do, as opposed to shipping the money off to a multinational. So And then, books on I mean, if you grew up in the ad business, you read David Ogilvy, right? Ogilvy on advertising. So, Adam Morgan, the all around challenger brands and what he did. So I sort of have it on a click, and then I love, rock and roll biographies, like the book about, Tom Petty. Keith Richards' book was, I thought, terrific. Bruce Springsteen. I mean, I love, and you dip into it. Actually, a book that's just over here on my desk is Rick Rubin's book. Rick Rubin, the record producer, A Creative Way of Being. Like, as I've leaned into my next chapter as a musician now, I'm leaning into this creativity, because I was the business guy in a creative business, this creativity that has always been there and that I'm tapping into. So I'm on a board, and the CEO of that company, I gave him that book. And this is a wealth management company. I said, here's for the inner artist in you. And it's like, okay, but we all have that. And I think tapping into that and being inspired by different sources is, so I love to read, and I enjoy, I make Rick Rubin and Malcolm Gladwell have a great podcast they do together. Speaking of podcasts. So, yeah.
Oh, I've seen some. Yeah. Rick Rubin's been on a few. They're really good. But Tom, I want to be the first one to thank you. Thank you for sharing your journey and your stories. And I want to encourage everyone to check out rethinkideas.com to learn more and check out more episodes of the podcast. So thanks, Tom, and thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, Jeremy. Enjoyed it.
What I got, you can't buy. It resides between my eyes. Walked through the fire, came out better on the other side. See, life's like a beach if you find the sailing right now. I'm feeling like $100 grand.